they are displaced sort of triple, you know, from their countries, from the areas that they live, and from some rights that they thought they had secure, so at a legal level as well. So I feel the impact of Brexit will be felt at every level in that respect. I suppose I'm only focusing on some of the needs of Latin Americans, but I'm almost certain that this applies across many migrant organizations.
Yeah. In fact, that is absolutely correct, because the day after the vote of the referendum for Brexit, it was panic, complete panic. They were calling me left, right, and center. There were meetings where they were employing people to help the people fill up the forms to get permanent visas, the right to remain. And there were questions, you know, what am I? I only live 1 year. Can I claim anything? No, I live 5 years, so what can I do? So those questions, and there were queues and queues and queues of people filling up forms, spending an awful lot of money. And now at the moment, the worry is that what Theresa May is saying is that all those people, they might not be allowed to stay. Is a big question mark, but is a question mark nevertheless. And I think that is the main concern. Again, the uncertainty for Latin Americans, the not knowing what is going to happen, especially the ones obviously with European passports.
No, I think it's a really welcome point around the vulnerability of certain migrant communities. I mean, I think there's been much made of people who are here on EU passports but might be quite elderly, they might have been here for a long time. So I think anything that adds to your vulnerability means that even if Theresa May thinks she's making it really clear what the promise is to EU citizens, there's something for us as a council to be doing to make sure that that's being communicated to our communities. I've got David who wants to come in, and then Kieran.
Sure. Thank you for your presentation. It was very informative. I just wondered, in regards to sort of second wave migrants, so people who perhaps come from Spain or Italy or Portugal, do you have any sense of, I mean, so my understanding is that if people have been in the UK for 5 years, that they will be allowed to remain, assuming that there is a deal, of course. But are you familiar with the pattern of those individuals? Would they go backwards and forwards between other, like Spain and Italy and Portugal, and therefore not qualify for that 5 years, or would they be able to document they have been in the UK for 5 years? I don't know how much an additional issue that is for that particular group of Latin American citizens.
This is highly anecdotal, I would say, right? I'm not backing this with much data, but I believe that a lot of people come through the European route, settle here. They might go backwards and forwards and visit family, but they don't live. The kids are here, going to school. A huge problem because they come with Spanish as their main language, for example. They come here and then they have to learn the language, though they learn it really quickly, as kids do and so on. But that has been some of the issues that the Latin American community have had to deal with as additional sort of issues that come to the Latin American doesn't offer services, but the other organizations who do, those are some of the issues that they have to deal with. And I feel that a lot of them come via Spain, and what I've heard and talking to people when we're doing rounds in the shopping centre and so on, is very much that they moved here because the economic crisis in Spain was so bad that they don't. And a lot of there's a lot of hairdressers, for example, from Dominican Republic, which I can recognize the accent really well, partly because I'm a Caribbean person as well, so I'm from the Spanish Caribbean. So I keep listening, and I say, why are you here? Where are you coming from? And that's the route, right? And they have settled here. They don't go back to Spain. It's a big move. It's a big change. So the needs of those population are, but that's from a general sort of anecdotal more perspective. That's what
It's a quick one. I mean, I know again it's a little bit anecdotal, but I mean, do you think if those people don't qualify to stay in the UK, do you think they would go back to Spain and Italy and Portugal, or do you think they would return back to Latin America and be lost to Europe completely?
Well, it will be. I think they will go back to the country they in Europe where they came from. I don't, these are people who have spent over 10 years, you know, the people I have talked to personally, they had a life in Spain, for example. Those ones who I've talked to are basically like that. So they don't see their life back in Dominican Republic, for example, or any other country. I think my experience has been more with the Dominican Republic. In Elephant and Castle, you can see a lot. In Seven Sisters, you can see a lot of that sort of secondary migration through the businesses in particular. And those are the sort of stories that I get from talking.
I'm going to take Kieran.
No,
You're fine.
I've answered my questions, so that's fine.
Okay, I think at this stage I want to bring in our other panellists, because I know that everybody's pressed for time. You're welcome to stay, you're welcome to leave, but thank you very, very much. And I think we will probably be in touch about our event on the 30th as well. So I don't know, I've got Isaac from Amigo Month, am I saying that? And then maybe if we hear from Isaac, from Gordon, from Carlos, and then from Ruth, and then we do some Q&A after that.
First of all, I need to introduce what is the Amigo Mons, and then I want to talk about the Spanish Portuguese speaking community, which also include the Latin Americans. Now we are in October, which is the Black History Month, but also we are in the Amigo Mons. The Amigo Mons is a month to celebrate millions of Spanish Portuguese speakers living in this country. According to the European Commission, there are between 3 and 5 million Spanish Portuguese speakers, including secondary speakers. But we don't know how many people are the first language is Spanish or Portuguese, because in the census it's not very clear the question. They ask you the question, what is your main language? Some people say Spanish or Portuguese. I said English, because that's the language which I use the most. So we don't know exactly how many Spanish Portuguese speakers are in this country. We believe that it's between 3 and 5 million. The British Council said 3, the European Commission said 5. The Amigo Month starts on the 7th of September, which is the day of Brazil and Mozambique, and ends on the 12th of October, which is the day of the Spanish language. And we run together with the Hispanic Month in the United States and the Hispanic Month in Canada. And for 12 days we overlap with the Black History Month, because a lot of Latin Americans come from African backgrounds, like myself. And well, the idea of the Amigo Month is to try to integrate the Spanish Portuguese speaking communities into Britain, and that Britain is aware of them. So now I'm going to take to show some figures. According to the ONS, there are around 650,000 people born in a Spanish Portuguese speaking country or population. There are 340,000 people with Spanish or Portuguese passports. So this is the second largest group, apart from Polish. No? In London, in inner London, the most spoken native language is Spanish and Portuguese, which is almost very similar languages. The difference between Spanish and Portuguese are less than English from London and English from Dundee. No? Southwark is the borough that have more Spanish speakers. Albeit Gibraltar, everybody speaks Spanish, and is the most Spanish-speaking area. Lambeth is the most Portuguese-speaking borough in London, and between the two boroughs, the number of Spanish Portuguese speakers could reach almost 100,000 people. I am Latin American, very proud of that, but the Spanish Portuguese speaking from Latin America are very close with the Spanish Portuguese from Europe and from Africa. Partly because a lot of us are not, but a lot of us have Spanish passports. I will say to you, somebody asked a question, I will say that the majority of the people that vote in Southwark, Latin American that vote in Southwark, have European passports, not British passports. The majority of the voters. No? And the same happened in Lambeth. No? Most of the Latin American people come with the Spanish passport, most of the Spanish-speaking Latin Americans come with a Spanish passport, and most of the Brazilians come with Portuguese or Italian passports, not too much with the Spanish passports. So there is a lot of connection, as Dr. Roman said, that most of the Latin Americans that have European passport goes to Spain, come back, go to Spain, they feel Spanish also. So we don't see it's good to separate us from the Spanish, from the Portuguese, and from the Angolans. Because the Angolans, most of them have Portuguese passports. And the former ambassador of Portugal was born in Angola. The deputy mayor of Lambeth, which is a Portuguese, or the former deputy mayor, Guillermo Rosa, is Angola, and the councillor of the Portuguese community is an Angolan. So it's very mixed, the community. We cannot separate the Spanish-Portuguese speakers along regional continental lines because we are very intermixed. How Brexit is going to affect us? A lot. I wanted to say to you one single issue. I have been doing, I used to start teaching history at the LSE, London School of Economics. And I started to do a research about the Spanish and Portuguese speakers at the NHS. And I have found that 1/4 of the NHS staff, 1/4 have Spanish or Portuguese names or surnames. I will not tell that all of them have a Spanish or Portuguese passport, but some of them, I would say a big proportion of them. So, and the other point is that there's a lot of Polish working in the NHS, and especially in the care service. I am a disabled person, and always I have a lot of Polish helping me. They are leaving now. They are leaving because there is uncertainty. When we are going to depart from the European Union, we are going to lose a lot of doctors, nurses, and paramedics, and it's going to affect the British people. Who is going to help the elderly? Who is going to help the disabled people? Who is going to help the ill people? Who is going to run the hospitals? The NHS is the best thing in Britain, and it's not going to work never without immigrants and European citizens. So the other thing, people believe that Latin Americans are cleaners. No, they're everywhere. The motor business, no, is Brazilians. They're monopolized that area. It's almost monopolized. But you see everywhere. We have Spanish speakers in banks. We have the bank that have the bicycles in London, no? It's a Spanish bank. Airlines. We have more than 1,000 restaurants. More than 1,000 restaurants. More. And we are mixed all together. When we have Latin American restaurant like in Elephant and Castle, no? We have Portuguese, Angolans, Lusophone Africans all together. The same happened in Little Portugal, mixed with the Spanish and Latin American restaurants. So we have more than 1,000. During the Amigo Mons, we have 3 film festivals. We have 1 gastronomic festival, 1 classic music festival, and more than 100 parties. You imagine? Some days we have 6 or 7 parties. Sometimes we have 2 or 3 diplomatic receptions. This is a huge community, very active, that contributes a lot of London to London. You cannot have the Notting Hill Carnival without our community. You cannot have we used to have the night carnival. It's finished, but it was half of the bands were from our community. We used to have a big carnival in Burgess Park. I was one of the leaders of that carnival 15 years ago. We used to have a big carnival the Portuguese carnival in Lambeth. We cannot do that now because lack of funds. But it is affecting the economy and affecting the culture. Not only the Brexit, but also the cuts and the lack of funds. And other thing I want to say is about the problem of reunification of families. Brexit is going to punish a lot our community. People are talking, oh, hard Brexit, soft Brexit, what is going to happen in Northern Ireland? But believe me, our community is bigger than Northern Ireland. And you have the problem with Northern Ireland going from the south to the north, and the customs, the control. But what is going to happen with us? Most of the members of my community go to Spain every month, every 2 months, every 3 months, every 6 months. They go out because it's 40, 50 pounds. It's cheaper to go to Spain than to go to Glasgow. So they go everywhere, no? And there is a lot of British people that go, that there is more than 1 million British people that live in Spain or have properties in Spain. This is going to affect everybody, no? Even if you manage to have the 5 years and stay here, how are you going to bring your mom, your uncle, your sister? This is going to be a huge humanitarian problem. People are not seeing that. We are going to have a humanitarian collapse with this question of Brexit. And the worst thing is that we don't know what is going to be the situation of the immigrants. We don't know which kind of Brexit are we going. We don't know. In 6 months' time, we don't know. It's like a Russian roulette, you said? No, it's like a Russian roulette. So, well, that is some point that I want to set, and if you want to ask me, I can answer to you some points.
Thank you. I think we probably do have questions, and I certainly want to talk about how we'll be kind of culturally poorer if we don't have our Latin American community here in the kind of size we do at the moment. But I do want to take everybody else first. Gordon, I know that you represent communities kind of across the board, and there might be a whole range of issues, not necessarily just of migrant communities that you want to talk about. So please, I know it's a bit hot-potty, but please, if there are issues you want to raise, we would really like to hear them.
Thank you, Vicky. I think Isaac's just invented Cockney rhyming slang for Brexit. Russian roulette. Oh no, it didn't work. Well, that was awful. Yes, this will be a bit all over the place because, as you say, my organisation represents voluntary community organisations across the borough, and to try and distill into what little space of time we have the issues and impact of Brexit on those organisations and the people they work with would be really difficult. I think it's fair to say that within our members and across organisations, the discussions, the impact of Brexit on them, on their day-to-day work, is not something that really features in any of the conversations that I have with them. It's not something that is exercising people's attention. The impact on the people they work with, absolutely, and I think you'll hear from people much more qualified for me to say about that. But I think, harking back to what Lorna was talking about at the very beginning, it's the uncertainty, and actually, perhaps more than uncertainty, the interdependency that the community and voluntary sector has on other bits of the system. So whether that be the economy more widely or the local authority or the CCG, which will all be impacted in varying degrees. I think that's where the level of concern comes from. The issue of the NHS, staff shortages, and the impact on social care and those people who work in the sector providing that level of care, I think will be a big issue, because as there are more vacancies in the NHS which are invariably better paid, that's where the sort of gravity of the pool will come, and then those posts in social care, the ones that are at the London living wage, will be harder to fill, and it's whether or not the people who are left behind will want to actually take those jobs. I think that's an issue for organisations around workforce. You've had tons of statistics this evening, but I'll give you some more. 65% of all people who work in the charitable sector in the UK come from, or who work in the charitable sector are based in London. 65% come from the economic European area, because there's a lot of Swiss and Norwegian people who work in the charitable sector as well. But they're in London and the South East, so 2/3 of the charitable sector who come from the European economic area work in the South East and in London. If you translate that roughly into Southwark, the estimates somewhere between 500 and 700 people come from the EEA area who work in the borough. So at one level, the impact on the sector in terms of the workforce isn't that great. It's what happens in other sectors that could really impact. The issue around immigration charges, because we don't know what will happen and how EU workers will be treated in the future, charities may have to pay those immigration charges as they would pay for somebody coming from outside of the EU at the minute, and that could be another issue as well that probably hasn't really been thought about as it comes through. The issue of sustainability and the impact upon the sources of where charitable organisations get their funding from, again, is an unknown, but probably highly likely to further impact and have make a difference to those organisations, particularly working in social care and rehab and rehabilitation services, and those who are doing community development work and community cohesion. So local authorities, the economy dips, impacts on your ability to draw money, and then that hits in other places as well. European Social Fund has been made an issue more so across the rest of the UK than in London. We estimate about £4 to £6 million worth of funding out of a call of 250 million in 17-18 comes into the sector in Southwark. So in other regions in the UK, the loss of those ESF funding will be much bigger than it would be in Southwark. But I think for me, the issue and the reason why we're here tonight is the impact on communities. And you will have heard from others about the sort of rise in hate crime and the anecdotes about children in schools being asked where you come from. I don't necessarily think that was a knee-jerk reaction at the very beginning of Brexit. I don't think that's gone away. I don't think that sense of there are people who live in our communities who will not be here, or the idea that they will be here after a while, hasn't necessarily gone away. And I think an interesting question is not about the communities who have made a home in London and Southwark, it's the people who have lived here all their lives and how they think about and feel as a result of Brexit. And I think you probably all agree, you're all politicians, you sit and watch the news, that the Brexit vote was not necessarily about Europe and the control of the European Union. It was much more about the sense of loss of control within the wider political system, that people were feeling threatened about the communities they lived in. They felt that the loss of social care was a result of immigration. And I do think that there is something that we can do to begin to think about how we understand that dynamic about people feeling lost or feeling like they're losing out, and how we address that, as much as we deal with the sense of alienation or disenfranchisement by people from the EU because of this vote. But the parts of the borough is more, certainly from what I've heard from talking to people, it's more prevalent than in other places. However, I do think the diversity that is so evident in Southwark protects us from a lot of that type of thing, whereas I speak to colleagues in Boston and Lincolnshire, where it's a much more homogeneous population. The influx of Polish or Lithuanian workers or whatever is seen much more starkly than it would be in Southwark, and that's the issues that they're facing as well. Is how do you balance what people who've lived there all their lives, and balance that with the impact of people from the EU coming in and this perception of taking jobs and adding pressure on already scarce social services. So I think if and when Brexit does happen, I think that's a question that is probably worth exploring more. Is that how do we ensure that people have a voice, they don't feel like they don't have control over what's happening, and try and bring together more sort of integration and community cohesion.
Yeah, that's really welcome. I think it's a really good point that that people feel they have kind of choice and control over their lives and decisions, regardless of kind of what community they're from. I think that's a really welcome point. I'm going to ask Carlos to come in. Welcome. I think you are here. You are the director of the Latin American Chamber of Commerce. I've got that right? Yeah. Okay. Welcome.
Thank you. Basically, everybody has already spoken about how the personal level. People have spoken already about the personal level and social level. For me, I would like to add this very specific thing about the the business level for the community, the Latin American communities that live and work in Southwark. Southwark has become a very important business environment for the people, Latin Americans who has been living here for several years, and for the newcomers that they start coming after the 1980 recession from all over the Italy, Portugal, Spain, and other European countries. Made of Southwark, basically, like most of people know, is the Latin Quarter, where we have almost 200 small business, which has varies between 1 employee to 20 employees. So the Latin American people have created a lot of jobs in the Southwark area, and now with the Brexit, it seems like it has created an insecure they feel insecure about what is going to happen next. If it's Brexit today, what's going to happen tomorrow? So a lot of some people that I work with, colleagues, have started. They came from EU. They already started to making plans, or maybe not now, but they maybe in 5 years back to go back to their countries, second countries in Europe, be Spain or Italy, whatever. Because a lot of them have left their homes, searching for security and work. Because now they don't have as much security, so they have started making plans to return back to work. Now, what I believe, because the Southwark in specific have welcomed the various business that comes from Latin Americans and other also EU, like there is some Italians and some Portuguese. We have lately received. We have seen the opening of a school, which is an English school that is paid for. I think it's by the council. I don't know. It's in the front of Elephant Road. I think this is a great way how to give knowledge to the people, because as Patria says, there is 1 in 5 have a language problem, and what we need from the council perhaps is to have a good information, reliable information, and perhaps channels of information regarding what is Brexit and how it will affect the EU, the people who, although they are still South American, but they have EU passport. How this affect, and also the law regulations, and because of this good information, we will be able to know what is the new law, what is the new regulations, and how we can also take advantage of the new opportunities, because Brexit is not only, I can see as a businessman, I don't see only as a bad thing. There could be also good things, but the good things we only be able to achieve if the government give us a good information and good support, and then we will be able to achieve, and make this Brexit more manageable. Other thing that perhaps the government can do is perhaps make it easy of people with EU passports to settle, because they have already they're here, they have created jobs, they are contributing to the economy, but if they lose, then it's not going to be lost only one person, it's going to be the person, the activity of the borough, and also the people who work for that business. Let's say, for example, in the borough of Southwark, we have 200 small businesses. How many people work in those 200 small businesses? How much wealth they're creating? So there is a lot also to lose from the government point of view, because so there is a need for the government to protect those activities. And basically, that's what is that's what I think is more important for my point of view, that the government should create a proper channels, information about everything happening, even for example, maybe even in languages. Maybe you can create social media apps that people can have and we channel all the information through these apps, because that would be much easier.
Thank you very much as well. I'm going to bring in Ruth. I realise as well, and Sally, this is a kind of, you have a very different perspective or angle on this, and I'm sorry again that it's all a bit of a mismatch, but it would be great to hear from you as well.
Thank you, thanks for inviting us. I was just going to do a very brief introduction and then pass over to Ruth for a bit more specifics. I was just going to say that Southwark Law Centre Our mission really is to work with the most disadvantaged members of the community, many of whom are destitute, many of whom are homeless. Again, like most things, Brexit will affect the most disadvantaged members of our community very much the most. Ruth's going to talk a little bit more specifically about some of the issues around settlement and also some of the specific groups that we're concerned about. Just in terms of our response, I mean, our biggest areas of work are immigration, housing, welfare rights. We take on very complex cases. Many of the people we see are migrants who are affected by all three of those kind of areas of law. They're very, very, very much complex cases. I take what everybody's saying about lack of certainty, but what's worrying us at the moment is that there's an awful lot of misinformation out there, and I think it is up to organisations like ourselves and the local authority to start getting out some information that we do know about to people. I think it's absolutely great that you are doing this evidence gathering, but I think we are coming to the time where we need to get information out to people. Just in terms of our response, the Law Centre's got two projects that are funded through the EU. We have a project to work with the Latin American community who've got EU passports on different areas of law. We've just started that project. Today we were working with an organisation, Indo-American Migrant Organisation Action Group, based over in Brixton, who are, today we were doing training for them around issues of benefits for EU citizens, welfare benefits. Our other project, which Ruth has been very much in the forefront of, we have funding through our parent body, the Law Centre Network, to provide training for EU citizens on what we know so far around Brexit, to talk about rights and to talk about issues around settlement and specific issues for different groups. So we've been working on that project for a few weeks. We've provided about 4 sessions, I think, already for different community groups, and so we want to feel that we're in the forefront, and we really want to work with the local authority to start getting the information that we have, because we can't just sit and say, well, we don't know what's happening. We need to. There's a lot of, from what we've heard from the community, from members of the community today, people do want information, and we need to get it out there. So that was just my brief introduction. I'm just going to pass over to Ruth, who's just going to tell you a little bit more about the work that she's been doing around the project that I mentioned, the training sessions that we mentioned, and some of the issues for some of the specific groups.
So just kind of by way of sort of background, kind of setting the scene. In the wake of Brexit, the UK is facing the challenge of regularising 3 million people's status who currently live in the UK under EU law. And they're proposing to do this through the EU settlement scheme. I'm not going to go sort of into the details too much, but essentially any EU citizen or anyone who's living in the UK under EU law who wishes to remain here legally after the 31st of December 2020 is going to need to make a new application. And the earliest possible deadline for them to do that at the moment is 30th of June 2021. The government has published details about what this scheme is going to look like. Essentially, for people who've been here for 5 years, by the 30th of December 2020, they'll get settled status. People who are just resident in the UK on that date will get some sort of pre-settled status. Obviously, one of the big things that's been coming out of these EU sessions is just the uncertainty that people feel, especially in the event of a no deal, and the huge amount of fear that people have because these rights, what the government has said hasn't been protected, and in the wake of a no deal they could go back on it, and that's one of the concerns that people have. But nevertheless, I think there is a real need to be getting this information out there. We are expecting that there is, that this system is going to be in place whether or not there's a deal or no deal. The The other very big concern we have is really just the lack of awareness, and people who are not going to know about the rights that they have. Particularly, I think, elderly people. A lot of people coming to these sessions, and they're actually British citizens, but they're coming to ask about their parents who've been in the UK for 60 years. They're married to British citizens, they've got British citizen children, but they've never naturalised as British. They've never made an application, and they're looking at all of this and they're not seeing that it affects them. They're not seeing that they're EU. They're just like, oh no, I came before all of that free movement stuff. This isn't about me. And these are kind of, quite sort of switched on children who are coming along, but many people won't have that, particularly people in care homes, people whose relatives have passed away, people who are quite isolated. And when that's going to affect them is when they need to turn to the NHS, particularly as elderly people, and they're going to be, in the hostile environment, they're going to be being asked, well, where's your immigration status? And they're going to say, well, here's my passport, and it won't, it won't be enough anymore. Other people we would be very concerned about are children, particularly, obviously children depend on adults to make these applications for them. Children in care, I think Quorum did some research in 2017 and found that the vast majority of local authorities don't know how many EU citizen children are in care. So if they don't know, how are they going to ensure that these children's rights are being protected? And also children who's, from vulnerable families where their parents aren't making these applications for them. So that we have links to various hospitals in the borough, and we do a lot of work there with very marginalised and vulnerable EU citizens, people with serious physical disabilities and mental disabilities. So I think, making sure that those people are aware of what their rights are, and that's why we need to start now getting out this information. I think also, however simple the process is made by the Home Office, there are going to be hundreds of thousands of people who need assistance in both in collecting the evidence and in filling in the forms, because the forms are going to be online, so there's people who've got to be able to use technology. Particular people we would have concerns about are the homeless, elderly, people with learning disabilities, acute mental illness, young people or children who have support around them, and also non-European family members who are going to struggle to prove their relationship to the EU citizen, because there might be domestic violence, there might be breakdown of those relationships, bereavement, divorce. And because of sort of the cuts to the scope of legal aid isn't normally available for these to assist with these applications, and so civil society is really going to bear the brunt of providing advice and information. But I think as most people know, a lot of civil society is already stretched to breaking point, and would have concerns that they're not going to have the resources for this additional need. Additionally, immigration advice is regulated, so people need to be regulated by the Office of the Information Services Commissioner, OISC, and so there's a concern that actually most community organisations won't be able to provide this because they won't have the proper qualifications and regulations to help with these applications. I think particular concerns around the settlement scheme are for non-EU citizens who need to prove the relationship, and that can cause problems where there's been domestic violence. So you're asking people to go back to their violent partner and get evidence of that relationship. The Home Office haven't said that they're going to check their own records. So the Home Office will check their records where somebody's an EU citizen, but they haven't said they'll do that where somebody's a non-EU citizen trying to prove that relationship. It also causes problems for estranged children, children in care who might not have contact with their parents but need to prove that relationship. And another group of people who are not provided for at the moment are people who aren't EU citizens themselves, but they derive their rights through EU case law, so commonly known as Zambrano carers. So these will be non-EU citizen primary carers of either British or European citizen children. And you know, I personally, that's a lot of my work is working with Zambrano carers, and they're not provided for anywhere in the immigration rules. Their future is very uncertain, and it's leaving these children in a sort of state of limbo. And another concern is the fees. The fees for the application are £65, which for many people isn't a lot of money, but for others is, you know, if you're on the Income Portal, it's an awful lot of money. And there is at the moment no provision for a fee waiver, so people will have to raise that money, or you know, community organisations are going to have to stump it up for people. At the moment, children who are looked after children, they won't have to pay the fee. But what about families who are supported under Section 17 of the Children's Act, or who receive other types of assistance? And you know, I think one of the concerns is that if families can't afford to pay for everyone, they might not pay for children's applications because children are less likely to be removed. They may not need their documents, but obviously it creates uncertainty when you get older. And finally, you know, what happens to people who don't apply? You know, if you have a deadline and people have to meet that deadline, there will always be people who don't because for whatever reason. And what's going to happen to people who miss the deadline for whatever reason? And I think, you know, the concern that we have is that we could be walking into a situation where, you know, very much like the Windrush generation, we have a whole generation of people who didn't meet this deadline, and what's going to happen to them when they then need to access, you know, education, healthcare, social care, employment. And so yeah, just really key that we're doing everything possible to get this information out to people.
Thank you. If I could ask that you just switch off the mics. Sorry, two at once don't work. It's a good challenge to us that we need to be out there, that we need to be saying things now. So I welcome that. Thank you. I'm conscious of time, we do need to do Q&A. I do want to give people that opportunity, but I know that Julie and Stephen are here and that we are trying to finish at 7:30. I apologies that this is very rushed. We've had compelling evidence and not really enough time to hear all of you as well as we might. I've got Kieran who wants to.
Yes, thank you to all of you. There's a huge amount to take in there, and it's really helpful and deeply worrying to hear most of it, I think. So two different questions. So first, Colin, you mentioned the Gordon. Mine's going to go. You mentioned the EU social fund, European Social Fund, and what's coming in there. It'd just be helpful to know a little bit about what that's funding at the moment, so we can understand what's missing.
So that figure I gave was based on an estimate, because it's very difficult to get that information for Southwark-based organisations. But as you heard Sally, the organisation gets funded by the EU. Generally speaking, ESF money is for employment projects or around social cohesion. So it's one of those two areas that they tend to focus in on. As I say, it very much depends on which region in the UK you're in, and depending on the levels of unemployment and things like that. So in Southwark and in London, the level of ESF funding is nowhere near what it would be in Humberside or somewhere in Northern Ireland, for example. It gets quite a lot of that as well. But that's what it tends to be for employment and social cohesion type projects and activities.
I mean, on that one, I welcome meeting up with you separately to talk about that. Obviously, a lot of the employment support we have in the borough, I know is funded through it, so I think it would be good. The government has said that they would introduce replacement funding. There's no certainty about how much that will be or where it will go or what it would look like, but it would be good to talk about what we as a borough are asking for as a replacement if we have to end up replacing it. And then I suppose the other general question, it would be really helpful to hear that very detailed answer on the employment, goodness me, my mind's not working. It's been a very long day, but on the citizenship implications. In terms of getting that information out to people, I'm just interested in your views on what would be the most helpful things the council could help do.
I think different groups are going to need different ways of getting information out. But a very quick win could be looking at what's on the council website at the moment. At the moment, there's information about these, this evidence gathering, but there's really nothing else. So just kind of information that, there are toolkits out there, even, right, the government's produced them, there is information, there's links to information, just to try and gather resources would be a very quick win. As the kind of groups that Ruth mentioned, particularly older people, vulnerable families, it's going to be a different way of getting information out. But for example, information on the council's website could reach a lot of your own employees who are kind of probably worried about the situation, who are EU citizens. So that could be first step, and then thinking through this, if this group's the appropriate group, thinking through what is an appropriate media for actually getting things out to kind of people who are a bit more vulnerable, whose first language might not be English, who are going to need more one-to-one support with, with applying for settlement or, getting information. But at this stage, that would be quite a quick win, I think.
Yeah. I think I would say particularly, with the EU community, with the EU Commission funded sessions, it's largely community groups which are then asking for these information sessions, and we're coming along and delivering the information. I think that works quite well because obviously community groups are in touch with particularly vulnerable groups, I think particularly around elderly people, Age UK, people like that. But yeah, I think there is, with some groups, there is the need for kind of more sort of one-to-one support with actually making the applications as well.
Okay. Thank you everybody for your evidence. I think Isaac's points about the potential impact of Brexit on dividing families and sort of the loss that we'll have from Brexit in the sense of the cultural diversity that we enjoy in London, I think, which is one of the things that makes London a great city, is definitely a real worry. But my question actually is for Ruth and Sally. I guess Ruth, perhaps some or both, I'm not sure. So obviously I think one of the things I thought was very, very useful that you mentioned was about our responsibilities, because one of the things that this panel is about what can we do in Southwark, and certainly just the consideration about looked after children in our care homes and also in the nursing homes and residential homes, and the sort of the very vulnerable people who might be EU citizens but just, as you say, just not engaging or not aware of what they might need to do, I think is huge. And that's something I hope we can get underway quickly. But in regards, I think you said your particular project was EU funded. So do you have any sense of will that EU funding continue after March 2019? I don't know. Does it end? How long is it for already? Is it for like a 2 or 3 year project, or do you have any sense of whether it'll continue? If there's any option to get it after we leave?
We really don't know. It's funded for a year, possibly longer. I really don't know what the attitude's going to be, whether or not there is going to be concern about the sort of like situation of citizens, or whether it'll last 3 years. So that's why we're saying we need to do things now and get on and do as much as we can at the moment, really.
I don't know if you're happy to share this, but what sort of, you have to say what sort of figure you're getting, because again, it's not something with the council.
Yeah, the funding for the particular project, the training project, is the contract with the Commission is held by the Law Centre Network, and so there's a small number of law centres participating across the country. So places like Manchester, Luton, ourselves in London. We've kind of committed to kind of providing sessions mostly in London, and we're getting paid on a basis for each session. So we're getting paid £300 per session. So,
okay.
Yeah.
And then the other project?
The other projects is what are we getting for that? It's around about 10,000, 11,000 a year. Not huge, not huge levels of money. Yeah.
May I talk, please?
Yeah.
I have to leave. I said I have to leave at 7.
Mm-hmm.
We have some commitments. I also want to say something that I forgot. Once I remember I was with Carlos and his brother, and there was a raid in Elephant and Castle, immigration raid. And we went to speak with the police and said, this immigration raid is affecting business because people don't want to come to Elephant and Castle to buy, even if they have papers. Because I remember his brother, who is British, he was detained because he was not white. And people don't want to come when they are raided. So you imagine how many raids are going to be with Brexit. And this is going to destroy Elephant and Castle. And with all this regeneration, with all this Brexit, I think that Southwark is going to suffer a lot. I want to say other thing very important. As you know, Elephant and Castle is named after the Infanta de Castilla. And we have several Infanta de Castillas. One of them is responsible of everybody of you using forks and drinking tea, because she introduced that to England. And Southwark was founded by the Hispanic Legion. So we have been in this borough always. And you can go across the river and you are going to see Emperor Trajan, born in Andalusia, who was one of the first builders of London. So we always have been in London. We want to be in London. We want to keep the connection, which Brexit is going to destroy, like it's destroying the situation in Ireland. And finally, I want to invite all of you to participate in the events of the Amigo Months. We have today a classic music festival. We have a cinema festival going on now. And particularly, I want to invite you this Friday, the 5th of October. We have a reception at the TUC, because for the first time ever, we are going to have the General Secretary of the TUC in London, the main union in Portugal, which is the CGTP, the main union in Spain, which is Comisiones Obreras, united to start to defend the immigrants and the Spanish Portuguese speakers in this country and to celebrate the Amigo Months. So you are very welcome to come at 6:30. And I'm going to leave you some posters, if you want to put in Southwark. And well, if you want to come to some of our celebration, please, I don't know how can I, and also if you can pass me their emails, no, so we can be in touch. But now I have to leave because I have some people that come, have a meeting. We have to have this meeting here, around here, because it's the only way I could come today. Thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you very much.
Thank you too. And I think we do want to make sure that the Latin American community is still in Southwark at the moment.
It's not only the Latin American community, because the people that say that they are Latin Americans are mainly Spanish speakers. The Brazilians call themselves Brazilian. The Angolans, they call themselves Lusophones. The Portuguese call themselves Portuguese. The Spanish, they call it Spanish. So we call everybody amigos. So simple, you know. So it's an intermixed community. It's like the UK. You have Welsh, Scottish, Northern Irish, and English, and Gibraltarians. We have five fingers, one hand. No? So we are a big community. We are millions in this country. Well, that's all. Thank you very much.
I am, again, conscious of time. I don't know if people have any more questions or queries. I think that there are things that we will probably want to explore with all of you after this meeting. And as I say, we have our regional sounding board on the 30th of October, so I'm likely to be in touch with you about that and whether you might participate or attend. But thank you for coming at very short notice this evening. I know that we have Julie, who's our Head of Human Resources here at the Council, and Stephen, who we know is our designated Brexit officer, as well as many other things. I'm conscious we're short of time, but it would be really good to have an update on where you think we are in terms of both our workforce and the Council generally in our preparations for Brexit. You're welcome to stay, you're welcome to leave, it's entirely up to you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try and keep this as brief as I possibly can, just conscious of time. A lot of the issues I was going to touch on have arisen both through the evidence that you've heard tonight and through the other sessions that we held. But if I could just pick up a few things before I go into some of the work that's happening in the Council. I mean, the first, just to answer that question that came up earlier about percentages of people with non-British EU passports within the Latin American community, the research that was referred to talks about the fact that 4 out of 5 onward Latin Americans, that's the people who come here through a country, moved to London from Spain. 31% have British passports, 22% have other EU passports, and the majority of those are Spanish. Of course, I think as was touched on earlier, the concentration of that particular population is Southwark and Lambeth. And it's probably in the UK 15,000 to 16,000 people, so it's a significant proportion of the Latin American community. The majority are in our boroughs, so it's quite a significant population across the 2 boroughs. The second thing, which is part of the discussions that have happened within the council, is that one about information. That's absolutely right. There is, particularly on the EU settled status scheme, there's lots of information starting to emerge. There's a toolkit for employers, there's a toolkit on the way for local authorities, there is information for citizens. It may not be the best way of communicating for some people, but our intention is to start to get that out through the website and through our own intranet for staff in particular. And I'll let Julie talk a little bit more about workforce in a minute, so that is on the plan. Of course, having been involved in some of those discussions now that the Home Office has started to talk to wider groups of people, including local authorities, about that, the unanswered question is, what if it's a no-deal Brexit? Is the deal off on EU settled status or not? They will point to statements that the Prime Minister and ministers have made about it, how it's in nobody's interest, but there is as yet no real answer to that question, and that was acknowledged in the last conference I was involved in. So, that may change. The third thing I'll pick up was an anecdote, and there was reference to hate crime. There's reference to kind of emotional impacts, and I know some of the other speakers at the other sessions have talked about this. Just after the referendum, I did one of the very rare visits to one of our twins in Paris, and the first thing that our mayor and I were greeted with was, "Why don't you like us anymore?" So it's that kind of impact on our friends in Europe, and in particular those that are here in the country. So it's not just about what's obviously hate crime, it's that wider emotional impact. So just moving on to some of the things that we're doing in the council. I mean, this is really, really difficult to do, and as Lorna and others have said, it's the uncertainty. So whilst we are looking at different scenarios, doing that scenario planning, it's very difficult to do more than that with the uncertainty. And of course, I'd also acknowledge a very good point that was made about years of shifting sands, and that will have an impact on local government as well. The last thing I'll say before I say a few little things on detail is as I think was said by someone at the last session, one of the areas of concern in my discussions across the organisation is about the economy and the impacts on the economy and the impact that that's had on us as an organisation as well as on our community. But of course, this has already happened immediately post-Brexit, as you heard. The currency crashed, inflation increased. So on the back of 10 years of austerity, that's already had an effect, and there is that concern that will continue to have its impact. There are basically 3 areas that as a local authority we are looking at in terms of what planning we can do. Staff, which Julie will talk about, impacts on our business, and of course it's not just in-house and what sits in this building and other council buildings, but impacts on our contractors across a wide range of areas. and they are being asked to what extent they've done their own resilience planning around this, and not just contractors who are providing services on our behalf, but suppliers who are providing goods to us. So, for example, one of the issues that's been highlighted is some of the materials we use for housing repairs are manufactured in Germany. If there is an impact on ports through having to do many more checks on goods coming into the country, or even goods leaving ports elsewhere in Europe, then that's going to have a huge impact on our day-to-day business, where the emphasis has been shifting to more just-in-time ordering of those sorts of parts and materials. And of course, you saw in the press recently the ambulance service in London bulk buying ambulances because they were manufactured in Germany. So there are impacts there that we're starting to think about. There were broadly 6 areas in the last discussion I had with directors across the council where people were expressing concerns. Some of that has been put very eloquently tonight. Community cohesion, this is a really significant issue for us in terms of the services that we provide to our communities, combined with economic factors. Economy was one of those areas, and the fact that, as I say, we've had 10 years of austerity, the impact on people who are already suffering through that, and in particular on the more vulnerable within our communities, will be potentially an enormous driver on demand for a whole range of services that we provide at a time when we've seen years of reductions in central government funding for those services. So that's one particular area we're trying to think about what that might actually mean for us. Lots of concerns there about increased cost of living and at work, the wider impacts there. Staff was one area which Julie will talk about a little bit. And then, of course, impacts on council business. So it's still uncertain what will happen to much of that European regulation. So whilst in terms of the legislation that gets translated into UK legislation, there's a whole raft of other regulations and guidance from Europe that doesn't quite have the same status, but will have an impact on stuff we do day to day, so food safety and all that regulation that derives from Europe. The other thing which to some is a good thing, to some is a bad thing, is of course the government focus has been all about Brexit. So very little else has actually happened. And what does that mean in terms of the services that we provide? And what's that likely to mean for years into the future, that if we do end up with this long transition period, then there's such a focus of central government thinking on that. Some will say that's great, they leave us alone. However, there's a lot that we do that relies on things that central government do. So we are starting to do that scoping of all of these impacts and what actions might we then take. But in that context of uncertainty, it's a really, really challenging exercise to do. So I'll hand over briefly to Julie.
Thank you. So just to briefly cover off the workforce side of things. So at the point of the referendum, Southwark didn't collect specific data on the nationality of those who came to work for us. We obviously carried out right to work checks. We didn't differentiate between those who were British right to work or EU national right to work. We followed LGA guidance at the time that suggested that those authorities that weren't already collecting nationality, which was the majority from our networks, shouldn't start to do so from existing staff, because that was considered to be quite sensitive. We need to be very cautious and not make already vulnerable people feel more vulnerable by exposing some of that. So we started to collect that information from that point onwards from new joiners. Since then, that's shown we've recruited about, it's 93 people from with EU national background scheme. We have put some information out to our managers around that to start to help those conversations. And we have also issued as part of that some helpful guidance that our Unison colleagues shared, which is a checklist of information people might want to think about retaining, not throwing away, and so on, just so that people are ready in themselves while we're not trying to make too much of it at the moment. We are planning some roadshows in the new year once we have absolute clarity as when the scheme is going to be open, so people can be more supportive. We can't give immigration advice. We do employ officers who work on citizenship, so we will be doing that as a collective piece. And our main intention really is to have welfare for our staff at the heart of this, and helping them to be guided through a process and not think that it doesn't apply to them. We are monitoring the situation in terms of skills shortages. We don't necessarily have those areas like hospitality that have high percentages of staff from EU backgrounds. You'll have seen a paper on social care that was going to be discussed in more detail tonight. We are also working with our partners who provide agency staff. The areas so far they are seeing skills shortages in terms of EU nationals are in IT and digital services and construction. So that's one that we'll be keeping a close eye on. And from that kind of more cohesion angle, we are also, following what Laura said earlier about reinforcing the message about inclusion. So we will be more visibly promoting things like show racism the red card initiative that will be coming up over the next couple of weeks, to again try and reinforce our zero tolerance approach as an employer to any issues of intolerance that people may see or perceive. So that's where we are at the moment.
I don't know if I have first dibs just on the workforce front, but you sound kind of relatively reassured that we'll find a way through this. Is that really how you're feeling? I don't, I mean, it would be great if Southwark as a council and a workforce kind of, makes its way through, the next year quite smoothly. But I don't know if you think that, you've mentioned the street cleaning, workforce, you've touched on a few other areas, whether you do have any particular concerns and whether you're not really as relaxed as you've disappeared.
Thank you. I think the difficulty is in not having the absolute data. It does make it very difficult. So at the moment, from our social care workforce, we do not necessarily have high numbers of EU nationals amongst our existing workforce. We do have high numbers of vacancies. So on the adult social care, for example, we're about to go into a programme of recruitment. We're going to a recruitment fair coming up, Compass, which will intend to recruit a lot of people into those OT roles and social care roles, and I think that will give us a better indication, because we're talking about vacancies in the tens to 100. That will give us a much better indication as whether some of the concerns that people are starting to talk about in social care recruitment are actually borne out in practice when we start to recruit into those. Because at the moment, that's not necessarily an area that is necessarily a concern to us. A lot of our EU workers are in some of those low-paid roles. We know anecdotally that we have high numbers of staff from Poland, also areas like Lithuania and Latvia, and we just don't have the exact data to understand that as well as we would like to, which is why we're trying to, with our union colleagues, where we know that there are higher numbers, we can start to have more direct conversations with those managers.
Okay. And I suppose on the basis that we don't get no deal, I take the point that we don't want to end up in kind of 2 years' time with people they haven't gone through the settled status process. But if we have time on our hands, we have time as an employer to support our staff as they make their applications for the settled status. I don't know if other people have got questions. I've got David.
Sorry, because it relates to that point that there's also another uncertainty, which is about the status. There are some discussions going on about extending the settled status scheme to EEA nationals and Swiss nationals, but there is no guarantee that that will happen. So there's another impact there that we'll have to think about, and will have a big impact on employers across the country.
Sure. I don't know if you have this figure, but do you know the total sort of Southwark Council workforce approximately?
The figure figure we were working from is 4,300 approximately.
And then, sorry, just to make sure I understood the point you're making. So you were saying that since the Brexit vote in 2016, we have been asking new employees their nationality question, and of those, 93 said they were EU nationals, 950 were UK nationals. Then you had a figure of 750, and I wasn't clear. Are those on top of the 93 and 950, or that's a different? Sorry, I may have missed the point.
I'll explain. I probably rushed it, conscious of the time.
So,
93 have declared EU status.
right.
915 identified as 51.5 as GB nationals. Of the total figure, that left us with 3,363 that we don't hold a nationality record for. Of those, 2,600 had identified as having a British ethnicity, which doesn't absolutely determine nationality.
2,600.
2,600. So we're just trying to get some indication from data we do hold.
So this
That leaves
unknown one is the 750 of the
750.
4,300 effectively, but we're not quite sure.
And even those, even somebody who identifies as Black British, White British, doesn't necessarily have a British nationality.
Just to add to that, I mean, from that post-referendum collection, is this all post-referendum,
Yeah.
95? There's about 10% of those. If you're inferring that the referendum has made it a less attractive place to work, which a lot of people would assume, it might be fair to assume that there's more than 10% in the existing workforce. 10% is probably a reasonable estimate. Could be a bit more than that. Just on the social care workforce, whilst it might not be a particular issue in Southwark, the paper that you've seen refers to UK figures. I've seen some estimates that talk about 17% or more in the social care workforce in London. London does tend to be more affected by these sorts of things, just the nature of London's population.
Thank you. I'm not sure if James, did you?
A question for some people who've gone, so that's
Okay. I'm sorry that I have childcare responsibilities, so I can't really stay either, which feels a little bit unsatisfactory, just because I think there's kind of more things that we want to ask about. But thank you, and I know that you are here. We can follow up with you outside of this meeting. We do have our LGA Regional Brexit Sounding Board, a long title, on the 30th of October. I'd really welcome it if committee members, panel members had comments or suggestions about particularly compelling pieces of evidence that we've heard over the last 3 meetings that you'd like to explore more at those sessions, or particular people that you would like to see at that event. I am not going to have that discussion this evening, otherwise I will miss my last possible train home, if that's okay. But it would be good to hear from people. So I'm sorry that we're a little bit rushed, but thank you all for coming this evening. Is that okay?
I mean, so there's secretary there tomorrow.
Thank you so much. We will be covered. Thank you.